Welcome to the Inventory Professional Podcast, brought to you by Inventory Base, providers of industry-leading property inspection software, accredited training, and on-demand property reports. Join us as we discuss the latest news, legislation, and all things property, hosted by our very own inventory expert, Sián Metcalf. With regular special guests, listen in to our open and honest discussions about the role of the inventory professional and how to navigate through this ever-changing, fast-paced industry.
Welcome everybody to the Inventory Professional. Thank you for joining us. I am joined again by my co-host Melissa from MGN Inventories. Hi Melissa, it's been a while since we last talked.
Hello, yes it has. Time goes surprisingly quickly.
Certainly at the moment, but is it great to be back actually properly working? I mean, I know we worked all the way through the pandemic to a certain degree, but now things are opening up and, we're getting through the steps. I don't know, there's a sense of that we're getting back to normal. And again, I'm always doing that inverted commas, normal, because I don't think everything will ever be normal, but certainly the new normal. Maybe that's a good way of putting it.
Yes, exactly. And I think probably actually different podcast in the future, but there are certainly things that I will take from what's happened, practices that I have now that will carry through. I did think to myself the other day as I was putting on some gloves, I thought, I wonder if I'll ever stop doing this. But then when you think about it, things that we used to do before seem crazy now, big crowds, touching dirty things, and it was just kind of part of the job. And obviously we'd wash hands and sanitize and things anyway, but now that I think we're in the practice of doing things differently, I'll probably stick with that. And certainly now that the roads are starting to get busier as well, I think it feels more like everything's coming alive again, but it's always a little bit hesitant to see how that pans out.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I was thinking, one, because of the gloves, the fact of having to wear them, I don't really like them. Two, because I hate putting them into landfill, but then there's no really much other choice. And I don't agree with using the sanitizer and reusing. I don't think that's particularly safe. But like you said, I think there's a lot of positives we can take away from what we've changed and how we've managed to adapt to our new normal and what we can then take forward. So definitely we're going to talk about that on another podcast without a doubt. I think for today, the reason we're going to be talking about tenant feedback is that I'm still seeing people or hearing people or having people talk to me, and that's landlords and tenants and agents, about the whole issue of feedback, whether we want it or we don't, whether it's useful, whether it's not, and also how you get it, i.e. with Inventory Base, you can put it onto the system, you can automatically capture the tenant comments, they can upload their own photographs, it's all date and time and captured, so from an audit trail, absolutely brilliant. But there's still a hesitance in a way to use it. And I think there's also a bit of a hesitance from a clerk point of view, a service point of view, to actually engage with it. So I thought it would be a really good thing to have a discussion about in regards to, where the benefits are and how you feel about it. So is it something you enable on your system?
It is, yes. And to be honest, it's not something that I'd ever considered not enabling. I mean, I came from a system of doing PDF reports, and if people wanted to add comments, make amendments, that was much harder for them. And if they did it on the computer, it was hard to see. And if they did handwritten notes, and often you'd get the agents or landlords scanning back a massive document for you, which again is not brilliant to see. I think the way we do it on Inventory Base is a godsend. It's so much clearer for me. I do understand the hesitancy in people having feedback, but it very much depends, doesn't it? You will always get silly comments. You'll always get tenants that haven't maybe fully understand what you've said, so they say it in a different way. And actually that, I think, is a major learning point for me. If I see the same kind of phrasing coming from tenants, I understand that they're not really engaging in what I've said. So then I can, say it in a different way. We said before about keeping things quite plain and simple and speak that people understand. But still, I think maybe you get a bit lost in your practices and just assume that people know what certain things mean. And again, if I get the same sort of comments, I'll understand that they've not fully taken on what I'm trying to say. So they're saying it in their own way. And I think that's helpful for us. That's helpful for our practices.
I totally agree. I think feedback should be seen as an aid to your training, either personally or for your service, for your clerks that you work with, and also, for the other services that you work with. So, if you're subcontracting or using other self-employed clerks, there's always learning to be had, and it's about embracing that. It doesn't need to be negative. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are times when you look at some of the comments, you think, really, and it's like, oh, you feel like you're putting your hair about, especially when, like you quite rightly said, you've made the comment and the person that is commenting on the report is also making the comment, but maybe in a different way, or if not in a different section of the report. Often it's in the scheduled condition whereas if you look at the actual report, it's actually in there, but for whatever reason they haven't either seen it or they've just chosen to ignore it and then make another comment. So it feels like, certainly from maybe a landlord and agent point of view, it's like you've missed loads of things and actually haven't, if you actually drill down into what's actually being said. But then again, sometimes also as a tenant point of view, they want to be heard. They want, in some respects, showcase, I've actually engaged in this. I'm looked at the report. This is my take on it. And, I would like you to pay attention to it. And I get that, totally get that. Because I think, as you were saying earlier on about the PDF, when you write it, it all gets lost in translation, doesn't it? Because sometimes you don't even know what comment goes with what part of the report, because it's all scribbled and
exactly, over different columns. You have to try and decipher it that way as well.
Yeah, and there's no room, is there, when you think about it? Even if you had room on the PDF, it was very, very small. I mean, I actually used to pride myself, I can write really, really small. And I used to do that a lot at school, but equally then it takes a lot of effort to read what it is that I've written. You also then feel that you can only say so much because you've only got so much space. Whereas obviously online, you could write chapter and verse if you wanted to. I'm not saying you should, would rather you didn't.
Some people do. Which, and again, I get that fear. I genuinely had someone that went through the report, and every time I said there was a mark or scuff, they'd measured it. I mean, that must have taken the full 7 days that he was allowed, and had put a measurement on. And I think, well, obviously I'm not doing that at the end. Going back, I would love to actually, just to be pedantic and say, actually now it's 3.5 centimetres. But there is that fear that people will do that. But I also think it's, a dose of logic. Hopefully most landlords and agents trust you and understand that there are people that will do that kind of thing. And I think that does go down to your relationship with the agent as well, especially if, like you say, people put things in the wrong places, haven't read what you've said. They could see a report that's got 50 amendments on and think, oh my goodness, the clerk's missed a lot, or you can trust you and realise that probably the person's just not been sensible about either what they've said or where they've put it. But I think a lot of that is engaging with the clients and I know when you're starting off, you can feel a bit self-conscious having those conversations with them. And I think needs to be sort of a meeting or a formal chat. You can just make a few comments as you pop into the office for keys and see that they said what I said, that kind of thing. Building that relationship, I think, helps you to feel less worried when tenants do that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Because I often find that both agents, landlords, and tenants don't read the report.
Yes,
they don't give it enough attention. And I've had that exact example literally over the weekend where a checkout's happened. There's stuff missing. There's issues. And the way the email from the agent was phrased was almost like, you've missed all of this. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So I've gone back to the report and definitely not missed. In fact, the report is really, really good, in as much as it's highlighted very clearly what's missing, what the issues are, where the changes are. It's all there, and it has the descriptions, it has the check-in comments, it has the checkout comments, it has the pictures. It's identified what's missing. But you could tell from the email that I got, maybe wasn't quite, well read or referred to. So I found myself emailing back and going through the report and pointing out, look at this, look at that, side by side, there's the changes only report, because I think sometimes when people look at the checkout, they look at it in its entirety, whereas if you look at just at the changes only, it gives you that immediate understanding of what's changed, what material changes occurred, and it's easy to read. Whereas if you've got the full report, then it includes everything that hasn't changed, so everything that's same as check-in, and sometimes you can get lost in it. It becomes a very big report. And so I ended up, writing a very long email explaining exactly what the issues were. And I got a really nice email back, but it was very short. I said, oh, right, okay, thanks. I put so much effort into this. But it then makes you think, well, why aren't they reading it? What is the barrier? Is it because I don't think it's an issue in regards to sharing the report and actually reading the report, because I think they're very well set out. Certainly, looking, I know from your point of view, from my point of view in our reports, they're very simple, they're very set out. But could it also be the fact that, some providers are too busy, there's too much going on, and that people are finding it so difficult? It's almost like trudging through treacle. You get into a point where the person's just switching off because they just think, this is just too much. I just can't do this. And maybe that's a potential barrier. And I think certainly when you're looking at feedback, you should think about, what the person's saying, what they think that you either missed or haven't picked up on, or is there a bigger issue in regards to, do they actually understand the report? And that kind of falls neatly into the issues for deposit scheme adjudicators in regards to acronyms. I've got to be in my bonnet about that, in as much as that if you're going to say something, then say it. Why put an acronym in? Then you've then got to go to a key to work out what it is that one potentially means. And then I saw one the other day where there was no key at all. And then you've really then got to work out what it means. So you can imagine from a reader point of view and from a tenant point of view and everybody else that, is going to look at the report, that's going to be quite difficult, isn't it? It's going to take your time to work out what's being said. So I can understand in a way why they're switching off.
Absolutely. And I've done checkouts on other people's inventories that have used a key and acronyms. I'm guilty of doing sort of left-hand side and right-hand side myself, just for the ease of that. But I feel like that's fairly common enough for people to understand it. But there was a key and I just couldn't get my head around it. And for the amount of time that I think they feel it saved, the amount of time it took me to keep flicking back. And there was one abbreviation that I thought it meant something different for a long time. You can understand why tenants and landlords, they would struggle with that. I think when we're saying as well, keeping it plain and simple, and what they try and do with tenancy agreements now is to use language that everyone should understand. And I feel like inventories and checkouts should be the same. It shouldn't be a chore and a task to try and decipher what it means before you've even got into it.
No, I totally agree. I mean, you only have to look at all the reams of information and notices and guidance that come out from the government. There's just loads of it, but all of it, I think, certainly on the user side, the people who are going to actually read it, it's been set out in a very kind of like easy to understand, very flowing kind of way. And it means then, I'm going to pay attention to it. I can understand what it is. I'm not scratching my head trying to figure out what does that mean and what do I need to do. It's very easy to navigate and understand. And I think you're right. I think if reports are simplified, and I don't necessarily mean in the detail, i.e. you just say white this or UPVC that, or black floor or grey floor or red floor, you still need that detail, but make it so that the person can actually understand it and they get what it is that you're saying. And it's something, certainly from a training point of view, from my point of view, I'm always saying to people, make sure that your report can be read by anybody that picks it up, and they should be able to say there and then, yeah, I get that, I understand that, that makes sense to me. Because as soon as they start querying and they're not sure, then you've lost them in some respects.
Yes, absolutely. I think that there is more of a tendency now. I'm seeing other reports being similar, being sort of toned down with the acronyms, but it is important. And I think it's a theme now that we should go for. And we've said before, essentially our reports are almost geared towards the end user, which is say, an adjudicator of a scheme. I mean, they more than anything understand things that are being said, but at the same time, why make it difficult for people? You know, if something can be pointed out and it's really obvious, then it's only helping everyone.
Absolutely, yeah, it's helping them. It's also, like I said, adding a training option, a training ability to us as providers, so we can understand exactly then where the barriers are, what we can do to take those barriers down, so more people engage with us, so that maybe we're not just looking, you know, to agents and to landlords to use our services. We're looking towards tenants as well, because again, under Tenant Fee Act, the tenant can't be made to pay for an inventory or checkout report, because they certainly commission their own. So it does make you wonder, well, why don't more of them do that? Because at the end of the day, it's their deposit, and but the landlord is the person who's actually commissioning the report. So where's the barrier for them to saying, actually, no, I actually want a third-party independent report, or maybe it could be that they don't, you know, necessarily feel that the report that they've been given is adequate. It does the job that it needs to do, i.e. protecting the deposit, because again, it's the tenants. So, you know, where is the barrier that is making or causing tenants not to use those third-party services? I'm not quite sure about that, and that'd be an interesting one maybe to explore at a later date as well.
Yes, and I do think there will be a lot more of it as time goes by. Obviously, the tenant fee ban happened, but then, as did the pandemic, I have noticed a rise in tenants booking their own inventories and checkouts. So I think that it is something that's going to become more common, and then obviously that opens a whole world of, you know, other things as well, essentially.
Well, yeah, if you think about it, I mean, it's same as anybody. You know, if someone commissions our report, then there is an expectation you're doing the report for us. We do, obviously, our main aim is to keep impartial, so it's all about the property. But, you know, you still talk to a landlord if they ask you questions about it, or you talk to the agent. Whereas with the tenant, we only tend to talk to them maybe a little bit about the checkout. But again, I'm like you, I'm seeing more, or having more conversations with people, ringing up and saying, you know, well, could you explain this, or could you explain that, which is absolutely fine. I've got no problem with that. But then you've got to factor in the time that takes, and, you know, the cost of the report as it stands at the moment, I think, is too low. And should we be aiming our reports a bit similar to other reports like surveyor reports, because of the information, one, that they contain, and also what they convey and what they protect. And when you think about it, a survey report does similar kind of thing, but, you know, there's a lot more training, there's a lot more credibility given to that kind of reporting, and the surveyor, you know, by their very nature, will get paid more for that report. And yet sometimes, and certainly in my experience, the time and the detail and the effort are pretty comparable, but the price points are completely the opposite side of the room, as it were.
Yes, I think people view them very differently. I don't know if that's necessarily something that we haven't helped ourselves with. I think we're all striving for a certain standard. You would hope people are, but also agents, landlords, and now tenants will always want a bargain, and they'll always want to go for the cheapest thing. And you might find something that you would price double, you know, someone will undercut you. Again, there's then the point, is it the same quality? Probably not. You know, someone that's willing to do something for, say, £30 might not be putting in the most amount of effort with it. And some people might not be worried about that. But it almost needs sort of more of an industry standard for us to all sort of come together and unite with that, really, as to what we're doing. Because whilst there are a lot of reputable people out there that feel the same, that we should be getting paid more, and for the amount of detail and effort and time it takes, certainly I think that's true. There are people that will happily sort of run around a property for 10 minutes. And I've seen that before on someone's inventory, date stamped photographs, time stamped will show, you know, how long someone's been in a property for. And I think that doesn't necessarily help when we're like that within ourselves.
I can agree with you to a certain point, but just getting on the timestamp point of view, sometimes that can be a bit of a misleader in regards to exactly how long a report will take. So for argument's sake, the way I do my reports, I dictate the room and then photograph the room. So from a timestamp point of view, the actual pictures themselves are relatively close together. But I think sometimes it's not necessarily about the time, it's about the report quality, because we're not paid for our time, we're paid for the report, and then the report quality hopefully then comes with that. You could spend 10 minutes or 10 hours and you could get different reports and they might equally be just as good. I think it's about, your processes and how you manage that side of things, because at the end of the day, we have to be efficient because of the price point of the report. You can't be doing a report on a 2-bed that takes you 6 hours. It's just not cost effective. You just can't sustain a business doing it that way. We'd have to be a bit careful, I think, about looking at picture stamps in order to work out exactly how long that took, because it's about the quality as opposed to the time. And I think the more experienced you are, like yourself and like myself and plenty of other people that I talk to, really experienced, and we know exactly what we want to do, how we want to do it, how to get it all together, because we've got all of those kind of like processes really honed down. And because we're using inventory based to its best of its ability, it means then we can kind of like control the amount of time we're at the property, but then the client doesn't then see the time taken to get the keys or the mucking around as you were having today with keys, etc. And also then what happens afterwards, because I know you've got a whole body of work to do from an admin point of view after we finish this conversation, and that we have to factor that into the cost of the report, and a lot of that just does not get seen. It's a bit like the duck on the water, looks perfectly serene on the top, but the little legs are going 10 to a dozen underneath.
Yes, and I do think actually a lot of people instantly sort of forget that side of it. You give the keys back and they feel like, oh, you're done. You got much more on today? And you think, well, I've got to, a few other things got to get back, and then I've got to finalise your report for you. But they do think that's kind of it, that the time you spent in the property is what you've done. So there's definitely that side to it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we can use tenant feedback to help us develop our service. And I was looking at, what kind of quality of feedback we can use in order to get the positives from having tenant feedback, rather than worry about it and do our best to not to get it, because we don't want anybody either one commenting on a report or two saying about that we've missed anything. I kind of like the opposite way. I like to think about, okay, what training can I get from this? What can I learn? And certainly when I'm training clerks, I'm always thinking about, okay, what are the learning points? What could we have done differently to make it a better experience, both for the reader and for you as the provider, to make it easier as we go forward. And I think sometimes also it's really useful for tenant to feedback, because they've got more time. They've got their 7 days or however many days either the client gives them or the system is enabled for. Certainly on inventory base, you can close it down literally immediately as soon as the report's completed, or give them 7 days or 14 days or 28 days. I like to give 14 days. I think 7 is the kind of the industry standard, and then give another 7 days on top of that, just in case report doesn't get shared on time. Tenants may be busy with work, etc. Give them enough time so they can at least read the report and get something out of it. Do you use that kind of timeline, or are you a bit longer or a bit shorter?
So the majority of it is 7 days. But again, what I love about inventory based is that you can be flexible with it. And sometimes I'll know if agents are particularly busy that they might not be sharing it straight away. And I might do that to 10, 15 days and just take I can take a view on each report if I wanted to. But my default is the 7 days. And I think that, like we were saying, it helps from a training point of view. And also the flip side of, if a tenant doesn't have access to it, I think, access to making comments, they're more worried that, like you said, that their voice isn't going to get heard. Yeah. Whereas if they've got access to it and they put a few comments on, and then God forbid there's something at the end of the tenancy and they try and say, well, this was here at the beginning of the tenancy, the fact that you've allowed them to make comments and they haven't added it on only supports the original report.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the facility for them to put it on, they will just do the same thing that, you know, people have always been doing, to say, oh no, it was like this at the beginning. And there's always the option that if it was a PDF, that it's been lost and it can't be found anymore. So I think it helps us in a lot of ways to have it on there from a training point of view and to support our own evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with all of that. And also the fact that, you know, tenants have a longer time period in order to actually look at the report, but also then to be kind of like test driving the property, because sometimes what we see, ours is a non-invasive reporting service, isn't it? We don't test loads of things. We don't take washing machines through their full functionality, or ovens, or put hobs on and see, you know, if they do heat to the right temperature, or that they're broken, or anything along those lines. That's not really our role. So the fact that the tenants then got those 7 days to make those comments, and there might be things that are broken, and until they use them, i.e. the shower, turn the shower on and the hose goes all over the place, and the screen door doesn't work, or there's a leak underneath the bath, we're not going to see those kind of things. So it's a great way for the tenant to capture that information and to be able to showcase that actually there's an issue here that we wouldn't necessarily see. And then a good way then, of course, then the agent or landlord take that forward. And if they don't take that forward, then clearly that's evidence for the tenant to say, look, I did tell you, like you just said, and nothing's been done, or the issue's got worse, but I've noted it here. So it really gives everybody the potential to capture that evidence, to showcase exactly where they are, and that might be in the positive or the negative. If they're maybe trying to pull a fast one, pull the wool over the landlord or the agent's eyes, or equally landlord and the agent are doing it the opposite way to the tenant and making everything look really, really nice, but once they actually start using it, it's maybe not fit for purpose, it's not as clean as it should be, or there's other issues that haven't been addressed that they told that they were. It's a really good way of bringing that all information all together. And I think sometimes us as providers, we worry about that. We think it's a reflection on our service. Whereas I look at it, it's a really good tool to bring everybody together, to bring them to the kind of like the table, as it were, to discuss things, to showcase things. And if we've done our job well, then we'll be picking up 95% of everything anyway. There's always going to be a percentage we won't, because one, if you think about it, we're not in there long enough. A 2-bedroom, you're really looking only being on site for about 1.5 hours or so, depending on the condition and everything else. But like I said, we've also got all the other work around it. But actually on site, that's around about the right time. But a tenant is going to be there 24/7 for a good 7 days or more, depending on how long you've been given access to the report, to really go through with a fine-tooth comb. So they will pick things up because they just have the time to do it. We don't. So I think in a way there's an education there to be had in regards to what the expectation of the landlord is and of the tenant, and also towards the adjudicator as to, okay, yeah, we've got all of this, and maybe this was missed, or maybe that wasn't taken care of, or maybe that wasn't captured at the time. But there are some kind of like reasons as to why they're not excuses, but you've got to be sensible about these things. We literally have a finite amount of time to be in the property, to do the job, to be able to then either get on with other jobs, earn our money, run our business. So I think there's a balance, isn't there? I suppose that's what I'm trying to get to, that expectation.
Yes, that's it. And I think part of that is educating the clients, whoever they may be anyway. Like I said, just with the logic of it all, I myself have been to a property that on the checkout, it was a very dull, rainy day. Nothing could be done about the fact that it was quite dim in the property. Did the checkout, went back a week later to do the inventory, and saw that the paint just looked terrible in some places, and there was no way of seeing that. It was just the way it was, and as soon as the sun was shining through, you could really see it. And there is the element of the human factor to it, but there are some things that just do get missed because of that. And like we say, the tenants are then there for, they've got their 7, 14, 28 days to have a look through. And you know what it will be like. You can sit in your own house and all of a sudden see something, and you're like, how long has that been there for?
Exactly.
And, you know, make that mental note. And the tenants obviously have always got an unlimited amount of time to be seeing that. So there's always that aspect. I think I have one client personally where I do all the check-ins, and I find that those reports are the ones that I barely get any feedback on. Because I don't go through a full inventory on a check-in, but I will point out the most important bits, and I will say to them, you know, you've got your 7 days, have a look through, maybe do a room at a time, and make your amendments. And I will make the point that you'll be sat here on day 6 and you'll think, oh, I wonder if that mark was included, and it gives them the opportunity. And I think the reassurance to feel that you're not trying to be on the side of the landlord or the agent, and you know, you're not sort of an accomplice to try and steal their deposit a bit. And that's a luxury that I'm able to do it with those ones. But certainly in those circumstances, I see much less comments on the original inventory than the ones that I sort of have no contact with and they're just sent out. Because people, you know, I think it helps that you're explaining it in words as well, and showing them, and I think that helps just reassure people a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if people can ask those questions and feel that they are enabled to ask those questions, they feel much more comfortable about the process. And yeah, they feel less, like you said, worried about whether, you know, that mark's been being put down, and they've got to make sure that they put it down, because otherwise they're going to lose their deposit and everything's going to go really bad. You know what I mean? You can understand it. There's an anxiety there, and I get that totally, because at the end of the day, the deposit's a huge amount of money. It belongs to a tenant. A lot of time people, you know, it's quite a difficult thing to get all this money together when you're renting, along with all the other costs that you have to bear. And then to worry about, you know, whether you're going to get that money back because maybe the report isn't accurate, or maybe you think that things have been missed, or that they haven't been given the opportunity to comment. Or they feel that, you know, the way that they are able to give the comments over written form, they said that worry about whether it's going to get lost or whether people are going to actually to pay any attention to it. I think, you know, with the system that we've got, certainly from an inventory-based point of view, but, you know, from a prop tech point of view, makes really, really good sense to, you know, center it all in one report so that everybody can see. You can see the timeline, you can see the date and timestamps, you can see the descriptions and the comments and the check-in comments and the checkout, and you can see the tenant's comments where it's all in one place and it's all date timestamped, you know. So from an audit trail point of view, it's really, really clear exactly when everything was done, when everything was shared, that everybody got the opportunity. And especially when it comes to adjudication, you can showcase, yes, the tenant was given an opportunity to say something, they didn't, they didn't sign, or they did sign and did make comments, and these were the comments, so that, you know, everybody hopefully is or feels on a level playing field. Because I think if we could, you know, nurture that kind of feeling and relationship with all the parties, then we're doing our job well. So to wrap up, from a positive point of view, certainly for me, I think tenant feedback should be seen as a positive. I think it provides good opportunities for training, helps identify issues that we may not have noticed, especially, you know, from a functionality point of view. And I think it also helps us to develop our service. And going back to what you were saying earlier on about understanding, what could we do differently, and how we could showcase the reports so people understand it and use it and actually read it, rather than just maybe put it to one side. What about you? What would be your key positives for having tenant feedback?
I mean, I do genuinely think it helps in a training point of view. And I think having it on there as well when you then go to do the checkout is really helpful to see their comments at the same time. I think the way that that's set up an inventory base is really helpful, that it's all in one place and there's not this sort of flicking back between things, trying to refer. I think it creates a good feeling between all parties that it's there. Like we say, there'll be the odd occasion where someone's maybe misunderstood or went overboard with things. But again, there's a bit of common sense with those anyway. But otherwise, it's, being open, and it's good for all parties really to feel that you are heard and that there's nothing sort of hidden. There's no worries about anything. It's all there for everyone to see. So I think it's very helpful.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think also, I think the final point from my point of view is it reinforces that impartiality, doesn't it? We're being very open with how we're developing the report, the information that we're providing, and the sharing of the report, and the ability to connect everybody and give everybody a say, a voice with the report, so that hopefully everything is balanced. And then, if we come to the end of the tenancy and there's a few problems, which it does happen. Sometimes they're very big, sometimes they're very small, but they're not insurmountable if you've got all the body of evidence all together in one place, so that everybody can hopefully then have a very reasoned conversation. It doesn't have to be an argument, it doesn't have to be a great big court case, doesn't have to always go to dispute. But I think, if you've got all the information together in front of people, then it's easy for them to understand it and go, okay, well, yeah, I agree with this, I don't agree with that, but how can we move forward? I think it enables that conversation, as opposed to causes more of a problem. But I think it would cause a problem if you didn't have that information, if you didn't have that feedback. And certainly from a tenant point of view, like I said, at the end of the day, it's their money, so of course they want to protect it. So hopefully we will see, like you said, more tenants looking towards third-party providers to provide reports. But equally, I think we as providers got to make sure that our reports provide everything that is needed in order to aid the conversation and not close it down, not cause more barriers. We want to open the gates, as it were, make sure that everybody's covered, everybody's supported.
Yes, I do totally agree.
Well, I think that's a great point to end on. Thank you so much indeed, Melissa. Great conversation as always. And I think we've definitely got a few more ideas for podcasts coming up in regards to comparable reports, about the whole issue of costing. I think there's loads there. So we're going to be doing this again, definitely.
It's very soon, hopefully. We'll try not to make it so long in between next time.
Yeah. I suppose it's the same as anything. We've all got very busy lives, and now everything is opening up, and there's a lot of work to be done. But that's good. That's great. Can't complain. Really happy about that. But it'd be great to get you back on and have another chat. So thank you everybody for joining the Inventory Professional podcast. I hope you found it useful. I hope you've taken some pointers away. There'll be some information in the show notes, and if there's anything that you want to maybe discuss with me one-to-one, or do I have a talk about any of the subjects we either discussed today or in any of the other podcasts, then you'll be able to see my contact details in the show notes. Thank you very much, and we look forward to joining you again in the next Inventory Professional podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Inventory Professional Podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, subscribe to our podcast now and share the love. This podcast was brought to you by Inventory Base, providers of industry-leading property inspection software, accredited training, and on-demand property reports.